misjudging the enemy. American soldiers, according to Japanese assessments, were the opposite of everything Japan valued. They came from a comfortable, materialistic society. They valued individual survival over collective honor. They would not endure hardship. They would not fight to the death. They would break. Early victories reinforced this belief. Western forces collapsed across Southeast Asia. Entire garrisons surrendered. Strongholds fell faster than anyone expected. Japanese officers took these results as proof. They did not see warning signs. They saw confirmation. The U.S. Marine Corps, in particular, was dismissed as irrelevant, a small force with outdated equipment and no real combat experience. To Japanese planners, the Marines were guards and policemen pretending to be warriors. They were wrong. A new kind of enemy. What Japanese intelligence failed to understand was how much the Marine Corps had changed before the war. During the years of neglect between global conflicts, Marine officers had quietly prepared for a different kind of war. They developed doctrines for amphibious assaults. They trained small units to operate independently. They emphasized initiative, adaptability, and relentless aggression. Most importantly, they built a culture where even the youngest Marines were expected to think, lead, and fight under chaos. This culture would matter more than any weapon.
On January 10, 1942, in a fortified command complex outside Rassenburg, Adolf Hitler spoke with absolute certainty about the United States. To those gathered around his long wooden table, he dismissed America as a nation already in decay. It was fractured, he said. Torn apart by class conflict, racial division, and moral weakness. A society obsessed with comfort and consumption could never endure the pressure of total war. A country like that, Hitler believed, would collapse the moment real sacrifice was required. Nearly 8,000 miles away, in a cramped temporary office overlooking the San Pablo Bay in California, a 60-year-old construction magnate named Walter Donovan was doing something very different. He was sketching ship designs on scrap paper torn from a hotel memo pad. Donovan had never built an ocean-going vessel. His experience was in tunnels, highways, and massive concrete projects across the American West. Ships, he was told, were an entirely different challenge. Complex. Delicate. Slow. Experienced naval engineers insisted it took at least 9 months to build a cargo ship. Donovan looked at his rough drawing and calmly told his engineers they would finish one in less than a week. Hitler believed America was weak. Donovan was about to prove him catastrophically wrong. A nation misjudged. The German High Command had studied America for years. Their intelligence reports all reached the same conclusion: the United States was not a warrior nation. Its standing army in 1939 was smaller than that of several minor European states. Its factories churned out cars, washing machines, and radios, not tanks or artillery. Its people, German analysts believed, had grown soft during decades of peace and prosperity. When President Franklin Roosevelt announced in mid-1940 that the U.S. would soon produce tens of thousands of military aircraft annually, German generals laughed. The numbers seemed absurd. Only a year earlier, America had built fewer than 3,500 military planes in total. Reichsmarschall Ernst Keller, commander of Germany's air forces, openly mocked the claim. He understood aircraft production, or thought he did. Precision tools, rare metals, skilled labor, years of refinement. America, in his view, lacked all of it. The Germans remembered the Americans from the last war. In 1918, U.S. troops had arrived late, inexperienced, and protected by Allied momentum. They fought bravely, but briefly. To German officers, they seemed energetic but untested, hardly the kind of soldiers who could endure prolonged slaughter. Hitler himself often returned to this point during private dinners. America, he insisted, was not a real nation at all, only a loose collection of immigrants, lacking unity or shared destiny. Diversity, in his worldview, meant weakness. This assumption would haunt the Reich. The awakening of industry. What the Germans failed to understand was not American strength in peacetime, but American behavior in crisis. By late 1940, even before Pearl Harbor, Roosevelt initiated the most radical industrial transformation in history. Automobile production stopped. Appliance factories went silent. Entire cities retooled. In 1941, American factories produced more than 3 million civilian cars. Over the next 4 years, they would produce barely a few dozen more. Everything else became weapons. Liberty Motors built aircraft engines. Continental Steel stamped tank hulls. Northern Electric, once known for home radios, began producing detonators and radar components. The key was not experience, it was systems. American industry had spent decades perfecting standardization. Interchangeable parts. Modular design. Assembly line logic. What Germans saw as weakness, mass consumer production, became America's deadliest advantage. The man who built ships like automobiles. Walter Donovan approached shipbuilding the same way he approached highways and dams, as a logistics problem. He ignored tradition. Instead of building ships from the keel upward, he broke them into sections. Entire hull segments were welded indoors, then moved into place by cranes. Instead of rivets, he used welding, faster, cheaper, and easier to teach. Instead of master craftsmen trained over years, he trained ordinary Americans in days. Farmhands from Kansas. Former clerks from Chicago. Women who had never held industrial tools. Black workers who had been locked out of skilled trades for generations. Donovan built housing, clinics, daycare centers. He eliminated every obstacle that slowed production. His yards exploded with activity. By 1941, cargo ships that once took 8 months to build were completed in 6 weeks. Then 4. Then, in late 1942, one ship was launched 4 days after construction began. German submarines needed longer to cross the Atlantic than Americans needed to replace what they sank. A war of mathematics. Admiral Lucas Reinhardt, commander of Germany's submarine fleet, believed he could still win. Early 1942 seemed to prove him right. German U-boats prowled the American coast with impunity. Cities left their lights on at night. Tankers burned within sight of shore. For months, the slaughter continued. Hundreds of ships went down. But while Reinhardt counted sinkings, American shipyards counted launches. By 1943, the numbers turned brutal. Every ship lost was replaced by 2 more. Then 3. Reinhardt watched helplessly as production outpaced destruction. New escort carriers, radar aircraft, and convoy systems closed the Atlantic. In a single month, dozens of U-boats failed to return. The ocean had become hostile. The war Germany needed to win at sea was already lost. Factories that never slept. Outside Detroit, a massive new facility rose from farmland, a single structure so large it defied scale. Its purpose, mass-produce heavy bombers. The skeptics were loud. Aircraft were too complex. Too precise. Too fragile. They were wrong. By applying assembly line logic to aviation, the plant eventually produced 1 bomber every hour. Engines came from one state. Wings from another. Electronics from a third. By 1944, production was so overwhelming that the military struggled to store completed aircraft. In 1 year alone, the US built more planes than Japan did during the entire war. The sky itself became crowded. Learning through defeat. The Germans finally met American ground troops in North Africa. At Redstone Gorge, inexperienced US units were shattered by veteran Axis forces. Tanks burned. Units broke. Officers froze. To German commanders, it looked like confirmation. But they misunderstood what followed. Within weeks, American leadership changed. Training intensified. Failures were dissected and distributed as lessons. When US forces returned to the field, they were transformed. Tactics improved. Coordination tightened. Discipline hardened. Field Marshal Leonard Falk, observing the Americans months later, noted something unsettling: they adapted faster than any enemy he had ever faced. By spring 1943, Axis forces in North Africa surrendered en masse. The same soldiers who had fled months earlier now guarded tens of thousands of prisoners. The fatal error. Germany had bet everything on one belief: that America would break. Instead, America learned its strength was not perfection, but correction. Not tradition, but innovation. Not purity, but scale. The Reich had prepared for a short war against a weak opponent. Instead, it awakened a continent that built weapons the way it once built refrigerators, and never stopped improving. By the time German leaders realized their mistake, the factories were already running. And they would not shut down until the war was over. The silence after the machines. By late 1944, the sound that defined the war was no longer gunfire. It was machinery. Across North America, factories roared without pause. Presses stamped steel through the night. Assembly lines glowed under artificial light while cities slept. Trains moved west to east and east to west, carrying tanks, engines, aluminum, ammunition, an endless mechanical pulse that never slowed. Germany could hear none of it. From underground bunkers and shattered airfields, German commanders tried to understand what had happened. Their maps still showed front lines and objectives, but those lines no longer explained the war. The real battlefield was invisible, spread across oceans, rail networks, power grids, and factory floors thousands of miles away. This was a war decided long before the last shots were fired. It had been decided the moment Germany chose to measure America by what it was, instead of what it could become. The war Germany could not reach. American soldiers still died. Bombers still fell from the sky. Convoys still vanished beneath the waves. But none of it mattered in the way it once had. Losses that would have crippled any other nation became inputs in a system designed to absorb damage and continue. A destroyed tank triggered a replacement order. A downed aircraft opened space on a runway already filled with new machines. The system did not grieve. It recalculated. German intelligence reports grew increasingly desperate. Sinkings were tallied. Aircraft losses were counted. But every report ended the same way, with a number that made victory impossible. Production exceeded destruction. Always. Men versus momentum. German soldiers continued to fight with discipline and skill. On the ground, in forests and ruined cities, they still outperformed American units in countless engagements. But individual excellence could not stop momentum. A German pilot who shot down 5 bombers faced 10 more the next day. A tank ace who destroyed a column would meet another column the following week, newer, heavier, better supplied. There was no decisive battle anymore. No final blow to land. The war had become a tide. The moment of realization. Some German officers understood the truth before the end. Captured veterans spoke of it quietly in prison camps. Not bitterness. Not anger. Something closer to disbelief. They had prepared for enemies they could see. They had not prepared for an enemy that functioned like an ecosystem, one that regenerated faster than it could be wounded. They had trained to defeat armies. They had gone to war against an economy. After the guns fell silent. When the war ended, the factories slowed. Not all at once. One shift ended. Then another. Machines powered down. Lights dimmed. Men and women walked out of plants that had transformed their lives, carrying lunch pails and memories of years spent racing clocks and quotas instead of bullets. The world that emerged from the war was shaped not only by battles won, but by lessons learned. That modern war was no longer decided solely by courage or genius. It was decided by logistics. By adaptation. By the ability to fail, learn, and rebuild faster than the enemy could destroy. The final miscalculation. Germany believed strength came from unity of blood. America proved it could come from unity of purpose. Germany believed industry existed to support war. America turned industry into the battlefield itself. And in doing so, it changed warfare forever. The machines eventually went quiet. But by then, the outcome was already irreversible. Not because America was perfect, but because it never stopped becoming something else.